Yeah, it's so dispiriting and so interesting and so tragic, really, because I really love journalism. Like I believe in it so much at its highest expression and admire so much the people who have done it well. I mean, I like, when I was growing up, those are like my childhood heroes. Among them were like Daniel Ellsberg in the Pentagon Papers story, and I was obsessed with All the President's Men, the film and the book. And really, I love the ACLU, like what they were back in the late 70s and when they were like representing neo Nazis and the right to march through Skokie and taking on so many arrows and, risking so much to do it for a principle, like for a cause. And I think one of the things is that you put your finger on is, we do want journalists to be cantankerous. We do want them to be unpleasant, but we want them to be cantankerous and unpleasant toward people in power,
Hmm.
to, the upper classes, to the kind of ruling class. That's the job. That's what makes them noble. And that's always what journalism has been. It's been like an outsider profession. People who often, they didn't usually journalists didn't go to Harvard and Yale or like $60,000 a year prep schools.
Well,
They
Donald
were in
McNeil, for example,
unions.
started out as a copy boy. I mean,
A copy boy.
he
Yeah.
started out right there at in the mailroom, and that's
Yeah.
that tradition to be scuppered by a woke teenager. I don't know how you're
It's
editor of the New York
repulsive.
Times and let that
And not
happen.
just the woke teenagers, but like the grown teenagers who dominate that newsroom who demanded it as well. But I think so I think that's part of it is I think that like journalists now, because they come from wealthier backgrounds, the national media, because they strive to elevate themselves to those circles, have no interest in being cantankerous or disruptive or adversarial to those who wield power. Like, Andrew, when is the last time you heard any of them, like from the Brooklyn online media culture, talking about the CIA or the NSA or hedge funds or they're obsessed with like what powerless, obscure people are doing. Like the chef at Mar-a-Lago posted QAnon stuff on his like Facebook page, or some woman who's just like a old woman in Florida inadvertently posted an event that supposedly the Russians engineered, and then CNN goes to her house and like confronts her. Some 4chan teenager produces like a racist. That's what they do. They act on behalf of the powerful, against those who wield none, but who are in some way defiant or out of line, which is why I regard them as like tattletales and hall monitors. But the other thing is, I think the broader cultural change, which is captured, I think, best by the book, The Coddling of the American Mind, that is generational for sure, where people got encouraged to believe that as parents, their primary duty was to protect their children from anything uncomfortable or harmful or unpleasant. And I know as a parent now, there is an instinct to do that. And you have to prevent yourself from constantly shielding your kids from anything that it might be upsetting, because they don't develop the skills to cope with those things. And so they go from these like overprotective parents to college, which is basically just like extended childhood, where the you know RAs and the deans are there to just be their surrogate parents and comfort them. And they look at them as like customers because they're paying tons of money and the customer is always right. And I always thought like people like you and John Chait, who talked a lot about college culture and how crazy it was, were being misdirected and misguided, because I thought like, okay, they're going to outgrow themselves at that. I'm not really worried about a 21-year-old at Oberlin is thinking or doing. The problem is they now have this extended adolescence, these millennials and Gen Z people do, obviously speaking generally, into their 20s and even in their 30s, where they get to the workplace and HR becomes their new college administrator who replaced their mommy and daddy. And they are incapable of of accepting or handling anything. They're like the princess and the pea. If there's a little pea under the 17th mattress, they're like, they can't sleep and they demand that somebody come and get it. And it's such the antithesis of what you need to be a journalist, who is supposed to question pieties and accept attacks and confront power and all the retaliation and recrimination that entails. They're so fragile. They're little babies who just can never be around any ideas that make them even slightly uncomfortable. It's an HR event every time it happens, as you know better than anybody.
Well, I did go through that to some extent.